Hello, Math Studies students, and welcome to your online lesson. Today we will continue solving quadratic equations, but this time we will be using technology, specifically on our TI-84 graphing calculators, and a continued success criteria that we will know we are successful when we can efficiently solve quadratic equations. A quick reminder, as always, quadratic equations have x squareds in them. That is the most important part of the quadratic equation. And then it also, if we're solving, it must be an equation rather than an expression which has no equal sign. We must have an actual equal sign so that it can be solved. We've looked at factoring over the last several lessons, and this time we will not be factoring. We will be using our technology on our TI-84 Plus or TI-83 Plus calculators to solve these equations. So first and foremost, again, we need to make sure that we have a quadratic, and we need to make sure it is equal to 0, just like we did when we were solving via factoring. First button we're going to be pressing on our calculator is y equals. We had done a technique earlier in the year with solving systems of equations, where again we put our equations into the y equals on our calculator. And what we're going to do is, since we're going to the y equals screen, is we're going to think of the y, or the y equals, as replacing this 0 equals. So instead of having a 0 equals, we're going to have a y equals. And so basically the y equals will already be there. So you're just typing everything else that you've got, your x squareds, your bx, your c, your constants, your variables, all that sort of good stuff is going to get typed in after the y equals. Then we're going to hit the graph key, which is in the top right-hand corner of the calculator. Just like we did for systems of equations, we're going to press second and trace, which is actually the calculate function on the calculator, to help us find where these solutions are. We're going to select from the drop-down the 0 choice, which is actually choice 2. We're finding the zeros, and what that means is we're finding the place where our y's equals 0, because we're replacing from our original equation, which will have a 0 in it, we're going to be putting it in place of y equals. So we just want to find out where we get a 0 value for our equation, and then it will be solved or true. Finally, after we select that 0 choice from our drop-down on the second trace menu, we're going to move our cursor to the left. So we're hitting left and right cursors to the left of where the graph crosses the y-axis. I'm sorry, the x-axis. And the x-axis is, of course, the axis that is going left and right. This would be the x-axis. Our y-axis is the other one. And so we're going to go to where our graph is to the left of the x-axis. We'll hit enter. Then we're going to move it to the right and again press enter, just to the right of where it crosses the x-axis. And then we're going to move it as close as we can and hit enter one more time. So we're hitting 3 enters there. I only wrote the word enter once, but you'll be hitting enter after you move it to the left, hit enter, move it to the right of the intersect, and then get it close and hit enter one more time. And then we're going to do all of steps 4 through 6 one more time with our other value, because as we know from factoring and solving from last lesson, we usually get 2 answers or 2 values for our variable in our quadratic. So let's take a look at actually doing this once now. So I have pulled up my calculator. I have looked at my quadratic and noticed that it is in the form of ax squared, though there's no a value, so it's just a 1 in front of that, plus bx plus our negative 10 or minus 10 value for our c. And the most important part is that it does equal 0. So everything's checked out. It's a quadratic. Really the only important part in that first bit was that it had to have an x squared. So I'm going to solve this quadratic using my calculator. First step, we said we checked it. Now we're going to our y equals. Again, we have lots of equations we could put in. We only have one. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to replace our equals 0, sort of thinking that as a y equals. So y equals x squared plus 3x minus 10. And on the calculator, we write it in the other order, so it's just flipping the left side and the right side around. So y equals x squared plus 3x minus 10. Now, do you need to write all this down? No, we just need to get it in the calculator. So a reminder that our x key is sort of near the top left. It's this variable key here. To get a squared, there's 2 ways. There's a little shortcut way over here on the left side that a lot of students use, but sometimes you need cubes, you need 4th powers, and so I always use the caret, which is to the right, and then hit my squared after that. So x squared is what comes up there. On the newer operating systems, you'll actually notice that it jumps right to the exponent, and then you have to arrow once more to get past that. But again, you could do that, or if I delete this out, clear this out, I'm sorry, I can do x squared using that key as well. Either one gets the job done, but I'm a fan of the caret, so you'll see me use that on future examples. Minus 10. All right, so now I have y equals the original quadratic that they had. I'm going to hit the graph button. All right, so you can see that we have this graph, sort of a U shape or a V shape. We can't quite see all of it, and I can zoom out to show you the whole thing, but this is a shape that you may have heard about in one of your algebra classes. It is called a parabola. So it is a curved shape, follows this general trend. They can be that way, and they go on forever, or they can be flipped over, things like that. They cannot be sideways if they're a function, so you will never see anything like that. So that's what we have here. And we want to find out where the values of this equal 0. So we're getting out different y values, because again, we have y equals as our function. And can have lots of different y values, but where is the x when the y is equal to 0? And those values are going to be right at the x-axis. So right here and right there. So I'm going to go to the next step on my calculator, which is second and then trace. Clear that off so it's not confusing anymore. And again, I want to pick the second choice is 0. I want to find out when my equation equals 0, when y is equal to 0, when it has no height to it. So like I said, we need to go all the way to the left, and I'm cursoring to the left here. And you can see I have this little cursor flashing here. And you might say, well, that's above the x-axis. And yes, it is above the x-axis, but it's also to the left of it. And I was only using the left button to get that done. So now I'm going to hit enter because I'm clearly to the left of the x-axis. I'm also above it. Now, it says right bound. So I'm going to move my cursor, and you can see it slowly moving here to the right. Now, again, you might say, well, you're below the x-axis. Yes, but I'm to the right of where it intersected because this thing is sloping down and to the right, sort of in this general direction. And I'm going from left to right here, and I'm going to hit enter one more time. Now it says guess. And the reason it wants a guess is in case I had two possible values within this range, I'm going to just move it a little bit closer. Honestly, I didn't really even need to move it. And now you can also see up here these little arrows appeared, and the calculator is only going to look for a solution between those arrows. All right, so I'm hitting enter one last time, and now it gives me a value. Now the y I knew was 0. That's what I wanted. I wanted my y to be 0 because in my calculator I had replaced 0 with y. So we're finding out when y equals 0, and my x value is -5. But as we know from factoring, we often have two answers. And looking at this graph, we can see that we have one answer here that we just found, but there's going to be another answer over there that we need to find as well. So that's what we're going to do next. So let me clear off my marks here. And I'm going to go through the exact same process, except this time I'm going to be looking for this other intersection over here, or this other spot where my graph equals 0. So completing steps 4 through 6 once again, we're going to go second and then trace, which is our calculate. We're going to hit option 2, which is 0. And now it says left bound. Now I'm going to go very close to where it is. And again, you can see my cursor coming up here. And I am right now to the left of where I need to end up. So I'm going to hit enter. And now I'm going to scooch to the right just a little bit, hit enter one more time, and then it says guess. And it really doesn't matter as long as you're somewhere in between there. So I really could have just hit enter again. I'm going to hit enter, and I get this time that my x is 2 when y equals 0. So I have two values here. So I had my original x, which was -5, or x equals +2. And those are my two solutions. Now, as always, I can check that work by plugging it in here. And these are the same values we got last time when we did it by hand. So I can take my -5 and square it, because I'm plugging it in right here. And then plus 3 times -5 minus 10. And that should all equal 0. So -5 squared becomes 25. 3 times -5 becomes -15. And then I have my -10. And if I look at this group right here, I have -15 minus 10. They're all negative. So I have -25 plus this +25 that I have right here. And when I set those equal to 0, it's absolutely a true statement. We could run this once again with 2, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the next example. On this equation, you will notice that I do not have it equal to 0. So we can fix that just like we did on the previous lesson. I'm going to bring down, well, I want to get that 12 over to the other side. So I'm going to subtract 12 from both sides. These will cancel out, leaving nothing, or 0, which is what I wanted to get. And now I have 3 unlike terms on my left side. So I have 2x squared plus 5x minus 12. And now I'm going to put all of those things into my calculator. So I'm going to press second and quit to get out of the graphing mode that I was in, or second mode. And again, we start off by hitting our y equals button. This time I have 2x squared, so 2x caret 2, that's squared, plus 5x minus 12. And that's my equation there. I'm going to hit the graph key. Again, we can see a quadratic even though the bottom or that vertex is a little bit cut off. We can still see there are clearly 2 spots where the graph is crossing the x-axis. And I want to find those x values because that's where y will be 0. I press second and trace. I go to my second choice, which is finding my zeros. It says left bound, so I'm going to cursor to the left a bunch of times until I'm clearly to the left of my point of intersection. I hit enter. It says right bound. Couple cursors to the right, I'm clearly below it, which is also to the right of it, and I hit enter, and then I'm just going to hit enter again, and it gives me a value of -4 for x here. Now I need one more value, so I'm going to repeat the steps. I'm going to hit second trace and 0. Now I'm going to arrow to the right, and I want to be to the left of that intersection point. So this is good. If I go a little further, now I'm too far. You can see my cursor is above it and to the right, so I can back off. And I can be really far to the left, but something like that's absolutely fine. I hit enter. Now it says right bound, so I'm going to the right. Hit enter. And now it says guess. I'm just going to hit enter again. And we get a value of 1.5, which I could write either as a decimal or I could write as a fraction, which would have been 3/2. And voila, that's it. Simple as that. I have solved using technology. Let's do one more example. Once again, we have an equation here where we do not have it equal to 0. So I'm going to leave the 4x squared right where it is, but move the 8x over to the other side by subtracting it from both sides. Again, we had a positive 8x. I can get rid of it by subtracting it or putting a -8, which leaves us with nothing, 0. So now I have 4x squared minus 8x. There's no c term this time. We looked at this on the last video when we were doing it by hand. But again, I can get this into the calculator by going to y equals. If you want to clear it out, I didn't last time, I just typed right over it, but if you want to clear it out, that can make it a little bit easier to see what you're doing. We have 4, we have x to the power of 2, or x squared, minus 8x. And again, that equals 0, but we're setting it equal to y on our calculator, and are going to find out where y equals 0, or where it crosses the x-axis. I hit graph. Now you can see the whole parabola. It's sort of a little skinny guy here. And now we're going to hit second trace. We want to find our zeros, so I press 2. Left bound, well, it kind of looks like it's right on where it crosses the x-axis. So I'm going to make sure I'm plenty to the left, hit a couple cursors to the left. Now I'm hitting enter. I'm going to go to the right. It says right bound, so a couple cursors to the right. But I don't want to go far enough to the right where I'm already to the second point. So again, I hit enter. Now it says guess. And since I didn't cross that second x-intercept, I can just hit enter right away. And I see that it crosses right at the origin. So my x is equal to 0. I'm going to do this one more time. Second trace, 0, left bound, and I'm already to the left of where I need to be, and yet to the right of my original intercept. So I hit right, or hit enter, I'm sorry. Then it says right bound. So I'm scooching to the right a little bit. I hit enter again. You can see those arrows now right next to my cursor that are showing the region that it's going to look at. I hit enter for my guess, and I get this time an x value of 2. Now, a mistake that I could see some of us making is accidentally writing down the y value, which is 0. We don't want to write down the y value. We knew the y value was 0 because our equation already told us that. We're just trying to find places where the x, what is the x value when y equals 0? And again, usually we're going to have 2 solutions, which is what we have here right now. So that was solving quadratic equations with technology. It's not the only way to do it, but it's a good, consistent way to do it. And as we looked at in the previous videos, sometimes just factoring and solving by hand is going to be just as fast, if not faster, than using the technology. Other times that may not be true. But it's another tool available to us, and that concludes our lesson. Till next time.